Welcome to Choosing to Matter Cocktails with Chris, a space for open, honest, and unhurried conversations. In today's episode, we sit down with someone who's shaping our world with purpose and passion. I'm your host, Chris Lubkeman. Join me as we explore how our guest has chosen and chooses to matter. Listeners, for today's conversation, I'm joined by Gil Friend, founder and CEO of Natural Logic and managing director at Critical Path Capital. And he's also the host of Living Between Worlds. We've invited Gil to share his journey as one of the original sustainability strategists, a coach, and his work helping leaders build a just and regenerative future. So Gil, welcome to the podcast. So Gil, I got a question. If you would meet somebody on the street, say anywhere in the world, how would you describe yourself to them?
I'm a scout. I'm a scout and a translator. I'm a scout from the future. I'm the guy who runs ahead of the tribe, runs over the next couple of hills, and comes back with, "You're not going to believe what I saw there, but we should get ready for that."
That's
Um,
fantastic.
I'm a pollinator. I bring messages from one culture to another, from one language to another, from one set of experiences to another, and help people broaden their perspective on what's so now and what's possible.
A scout, a pollinator. Do you have a third? Because all things come in threes.
I'm a translator.
Beautiful.
We all of us speak in different languages. We have different metaphors, different life experiences. I did a course years ago with Howard Odom, who is one of the founders of systems energetics work. And he did this maddening thing in the program. Someone would ask a question and he would not answer it. He would say, "Who are you?" Meaning like, where are you from? What's your profession? And people initially got kind of irritated. They thought it was sort of condescending. But what happened every time was he then answered the question in the language of the person asking it. If you were a medical doctor, it'd be a different answer than if you're an engineer, than if you're a government official, than if you're a school teacher. And it had remarkable fluidity to be able to speak in a way that people could hear in ways that mattered to them, in ways that they already understood. So that seems to be part of the work. At its most fundamental level, and this is one that you know well, I've helped business leaders understand the financial and business implications of sustainability strategies, not as like a do-gooder thing, but as something that had fundamental implications for the financial health and futures of the company. And that required translation from, ecological, biological, physical, engineering language into financial language, risk language.
That's great. I like that very much.
Yeah.
I can see that in you, and I think of your career. Those
Mm,
beautiful descriptors quite well. Now, when
mm,
when we were doing a bit of scouting for today, there is a request that we made of you, which was your
mm.
favorite cocktail, because this is Choosing to Matter Cocktails with Chris, and your response was
My response was rasa. It's early in the morning here in California, so my cocktails are a warm cup of beverage. This is an adaptogenic herbal brew brewed. Um, what do we have in here? A base of chicory and burdock roasted, often seen in coffee substitutes, but a stack of mushrooms and other adaptogenic herbs um, that that they say are good for you, and that's what it feels like to me. So,
so.
cheers. What do you
All
got?
right, I have the same, So I have to confess I have never had this before. So I have it
Aha.
right here. This is going to be my first slurp of my adaptogenic. I'm not quite. You're gonna have to explain what that is after we toast to today, and then
Okay.
we're gonna go. So here, Jill, here's seeing you again. A tears to you.
Here's to you. Have a slurp. Let's see if you sparkle.
Interesting. It's a little. It tastes a little earthy. There's a little nutty, chocolatey,
Mhm.
coffee. It's interesting. I could drink
Good.
that.
Enjoy.
Oh.
Well, let's see if it helps you adapt.
I can't. So where did you start? Why did you start with this drink?
With this
Yeah.
drink, I've not been much of a coffee drinker for a long time. I'm very sensitive to caffeine.
Hmm.
So that hasn't been a part of my ritual. But my friend Lopa van der Merch, who's a serial entrepreneur, was known as the biochar queen for many years, founded this company. She had had health issues for herself and her family and went on a quest to find out what would be good for her, and in the slot of the morning coffee. And she developed this company with a master herbalist brewmaster who developed the concoctions. They have a line of, I don't know, a dozen or so different products, including a cocoa one like what you're drinking. I tried it out. I liked it. Felt good. I'm an N equals one. I'm not a statistically validated placebo-controlled experiment here, but it felt to me like it served me well, set me up well for my day. Alert, focused, not jangly. Um,
That's cool.
a bit of a learning curve to adapt to the taste because everything new is a little different for the body.
Sure. Interesting. That's really great. Thank you for
But yeah,
sharing that.
yeah,
It's a new. I like learning something new.
you bet.
We're both very curious humans, so this is kind of cool. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah, good,
So,
good.
so Gilles, I've known you for quite a few years in many different characteristics, many different roles, many different places. Tell us a little bit about who you are. Where did you come from? Where were you born?
Well, I was born in New York City.
Hmm.
Um, Okay, well, let's see. What's the trajectory that's relevant for here is that I was born in the city in a very simplified environment. I think back to my youth and I remember uh, um, a lawn with ryegrass and clover and ants and bees and occasionally certain years Japanese beetles and sparrows and robins
Hmm.
and sycamore trees.
Yep.
And it was a created environment and a fairly simple one, but I loved being outdoors. And as I got to be a little older, went away to summer camp and just relished the experience of being out in the woods for the summer. Um, Something in me came alive in that. So that was kind of an early hint of what was going on. I was a science kid. I went to college majoring in physics.
Hmm.
I entered college right at the heart of the Vietnam War, didn't have a single semester where the school was open the entire semester.
Okay.
It was always shut down by some sort of student action around. This is the late 60s, if you haven't
Yeah,
guessed
I
that yet.
figured that. Yeah.
Um, yeah, strayed from physics, took my degree in English, uh, moved to Washington, D.C. for a whole host of reasons we can get into it another time. And the path changed in an unusual way. I wound up cooking in a natural foods restaurant. Had not been a cook before, but I did that, and I started learning about nutrition, which led me to thinking about food and agriculture, and reading about what in the early '70s was being focused on as the world food crisis. You
Hmm.
may
I
remember
do. Yeah.
that. And so, to the dismay of my friends, I was spending a lot of my spare time in the library reading scientific
Hmm.
journals. So the science kid was not gone. Um, uh, Along the same way, a Whole Earth catalog started appearing in my lap. In there, I found Stuart Brand's review of Buckminster Fuller's operating manual for Spaceship Earth. I got that and read that, thought it was the most lucid thing I'd ever read. Handed it to my roommate, who said, I can't make any sense out of this at all. Because, Bucky wrote in sentences that went on for
Yeah.
pages. Um, I um, started reading up on him, tracked him down at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois, where he was the scholar in residence at the time. I called up to get a certain piece of literature that I couldn't find anywhere. And whoever it was on the phone said to me, well, we're having a World Game workshop this summer. You should come out.
Cool.
So while all of my friends from the Natural Foods restaurant went off to the first Rainbow Family gathering in the Rockies to spend the summer, smoking dope and running naked through the mountains, I went to Carbondale, Illinois, and spent a month in the library and with a team of 80 people from around the world looking at, to Bucky's challenge, how do we make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone. So that's how I spent my summer vacation, doing a deep dive, basically a planetary charrette. The
Yeah.
charrette game, a comprehensive whole systems, multidimensional look at food, ag, energy, housing, transportation, recreation, education, culture, and a number of other issues using Bucky's design science frame, which is to say, where are we now? Let's specify the reality of where we are now. Let's specify the preferred state of what would be good. In the case of food and ag, where I worked, you know, a growing population adequately nourished around the world in a sustainable way. And each of the groups did that. And remarkably, two lessons came for me out of that. One was that despite all that I had heard, there was no necessary physical barrier to that 100% success. I mean, even then, it's not that people were hungry because there wasn't enough food being produced on the planet. There were other reasons than that. And we projected ahead in terms of population growth and land capacity and so forth. And it was clear that the barriers to 100% success for humanity were not physical resource constraints, but were the way we play the game. And the second striking lesson was that even though we were taking a global look, again and again in these 10 different research groups operating relatively independently, the solutions tended to be local, small scale, adapted to place. Not universal wash geoengineering, but things that made sense given soil, climate, regime, culture, and so forth, different places, which is pertinent because I came out of that experience, went back to Washington, and together with David Morris and Neil Seldman, co-founded the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, which was a think and do tank focused on urban ecological economic development. How do we think about cities as places that are generators, not just consumers of resources, that produce their own food, that cycle their waste, that harvest the energy necessary? Early presage of a lot of the work that was done over the next several decades.
That's, that,
So that's the launch
that's a
story.
beautiful launch story. Thank you for sharing that, Gil. I think I didn't
Yeah.
know the Buckminster Fuller part of this is part of the launch pad.
Ah,
That's amazing to me
yes.
uh,
Yeah.
to, to learn that. And so you went back to, I guess, the urban or suburban roots of your genesis, looking, as you said, some of
Well, the early roots were suburban. This was now fully urban
the,
in the heart of DC, a few blocks from the White
yeah.
House.
And, and that, what lessons did you take from those early days and those, I guess it would have been the 70s, with, which are some of exactly the
Yeah.
same challenges we're grappling with now. I mean, one could argue 50 years later, uh, the future seems to be smacking us back in the head.
hmm Um, well, I guess one lesson is that while the popular culture and media focus was on Washington and national politics and the Nixon administration, and in fact, Time magazine, I remember had a cover story in the early '70s about the '60s are over. Meaning the creativity and ferment and so forth of this, and things had been buckling down. But while that was happening, Institute for Local Self-Reliance in Washington, the New Alchemy Institute in Massachusetts, the Center for Neighborhood Technology in Chicago, the RAIN magazine people in the Pacific Northwest, there was enormous ferment at the local level. Ecological innovation, looking at regenerative communities, different terms at different times. But as we looked across the country, we saw just an outpouring of creative grassroots activity at every level. So there were two different stories being told. There was a buttoned up story in the national media. And if you lifted the covers, lots going on.
Fascinating.
Um,
That's really cool, actually, because then, but so
yeah.
take me from focusing on the urban to the
hmm
translating corporate and sustainability, because this is you've really you married those as in a very important way.
hmm
How did that, where did that come from?
Yeah. Well, that's been my focus really since the early '90s, Chris. And it came from a kind of personal crisis. After many journeys, we've talked about some of them, but there are others intervening. Different entrepreneurial ventures, some successful, some not so much. In the late '80s, I was not sure what I wanted to do next. You talked about serial retirement. I was ready for the next adventure, and I wasn't sure what it was. And I went out and talked with a bunch of friends and colleagues who knew me and said, what's needed now? Where am I good? Where can I be useful? And the message came back from a number of different sources: business and environment, the intersection of business and environment. And so I started to, excuse me. So I started to explore that juncture. I started to explore that opportunity, and it became clear to me that there was a story that wasn't being told or wasn't being well told. about the business opportunity in environmental responsibility, not as a regulatory response, not as a do-gooder shaming, you should do this, but there was an intrinsic business case that wasn't being made yet. I was among the earlier people talking about the business case for sustainability, why this makes sense
Yeah.
in the logic of the boardroom,
Yeah.
not the logic of government affairs or marketing, but the logic of the
Yeah.
boardroom and the CFO and so forth. I started doing a biweekly column for the Los Angeles Times Syndicate called The New Bottom Line. Started that in the early 90s, where I started exploring and developing my voice in these themes, and then began working with companies as diverse as Sun Microsystems in Silicon Valley and Odwalla, the juice company, a little bit down the road from them. Very different genesis stories and different flavors and cultures to them, but some of the same logic about how do we
Yeah.
integrate the logic of what I've come to call the 3.8 billion years of open source R&D that's been done by Earth's living systems into the logic of the business systems that I'll argue are going to work a lot better if they use that R&D.
It's a lot of R&D that's there for us to utilize, and that brought you
Yeah,
into this understanding, as you said, this joining of two different logics, some to sort of, or two different vocabularies, two different worlds. As you say, it comes back to your
yeah, yeah,
translator, and that's where we got
yeah,
to know each other when you were in that role.
yeah, exactly so. Yeah.
And so, if we think about that, I just want with that for a moment, this idea of it's what's good for one has to be good for the other. It's not
Mhm.
always the case that what's good for business is good for sustainability, but it seems to be the case what's good for sustainability is good for business. Or how would you? Let me ask this differently. I like this idea of you as the translator, the pollinator, and the scout, which you started off with. Though, if we come into the '90s, when you were in this role of
Mhm.
translating, how were you also at the same time pollinating and scouting? What were some of the things that you were doing
Mhm.
at that point?
Well, I was offering my clients a new story,
Hmm.
a different way of interpreting what they're doing. For example, uh, everybody knows that you want to minimize waste in business, but there's a lot of waste that's invisible, and there's a lot of waste that's taken for granted and considered inevitable. Uh, you've seen this, I'm sure. Companies say, well, we're doing the best we can. This factory is operating as well as it possibly can be. Okay, so we'll say, well, do you know what the waste is? So we would help companies get a window on their waste, both by actually measuring, looking at their operations, doing an assessment of what's happening physically with physical waste, energy waste, water waste, measuring, providing simple metrics and displays back to them so they can see what's happening. Um, Always surprising, always more waste or what we've come to call non-product output, stuff that you're manufacturing but not selling.
Mhm.
You're actually paying people to take away and process for you. Um, um, so that's one part of the story. And the other part of the story was people would say, well, we're doing as well as can be done. We say, no, here's an example of somebody who's doing better. Here's somebody in the same industry or an adjacent industry, or maybe even a different industry who's done something related. What ideas does this give you? When we were working with Odwalla, the juice company, one of the guys on my team had run factories for Polaroid. And he looked at a carrot juice pressing machine that was, grinding up carrots and pressing them and putting out a thick, viscous fluid flowing over rollers and a steel funnel. And he said, that looks like just the film deposition processes that we're using at Polaroid, something I guarantee you nobody in food processing ever would have seen. But we always had multidisciplinary teams so that people could bring in experience from different worlds and translate them and say, here's a way that you might be able to do this better, preserving productivity, preserving the quality of the product, preserving the economics of the game, because you cannot sacrifice any of those. Cannot sacrifice worker safety, cannot sacrifice any of the constraints that are already there, but adding another dimension of value. So we would do things like
Oh,
that.
great.
We did that with probably a couple of hundred companies,
Hmm.
including some of the best in the world. Never found one where there wasn't money lying on the floor,
Mhm.
unseen.
Interesting. That's really fascinating, I think. So let me ask you, so Gil, do you say it was fate or design that brought you to where you are today?
What's the difference?
You can interpret fate.
Well,
Fate to me is just sort of you kind of go
um,
with the wind, and design is I knew where I wanted to go. And
it's it's a combination of fate and design and contingency.
Mhm. Tell me more.
What do you bump into? Um, yeah, it's a great question. I'm not, and I asked you, what's the difference, not just to be a wise guy, but because it's not always clear.
Mhm.
Um, there was some intention early on. Yeah, so there's a long time intention to have meaning and contribution and to be of value in the world and to be of service to a better world and to care about a better world. Exactly what form that would take, that was billiard balls bumping around for a while until at some point, well, with the encounter with Bucky, part of the direction became clear.
Yep.
Um, Throughout that work, there was always a lot of communication and translation. The business intersection came 20 years later
Yep.
to see how I could deploy my intellectual capabilities, my specific experiences, my capacity as a translator and as a communicator, and what's come to be called a thought leader, but is really a guy who listens to what people care about
Mhm.
and tells them a story in the language that resonates with their care.
Yep.
You know, so it's different than a preacher saying, "I've got a message for you, and I'm going to deliver it to you, and maybe cram it down your throat." It's more like an exploratory conversation with clients and friends and colleagues to say, what might be possible here? What is it that we care about here, and what can we do to bring that forward
Mhm.
in the world? So there becomes design in there. Certainly a lot of the design work is grounded on the ecological principles of this 3.8 billion years of R&D. What works? What has worked? How do we start to discover opportunities to apply that
Mhm.
in whatever aspect of life we're thinking about, whether it's manufacturing plant or how I run my kitchen at home?
Mhm. So when you were a teenager,
Yeah.
what did you imagine you would be doing when you were, say, 50, 60 plus?
Well, I had no idea. I had no idea in two dimensions. I had no idea what I would be doing, and I had no idea what 50 or 60 plus would ever be like. Because, I
Yeah.
mean, 30 seemed
Fair.
unimaginable. 56 had no
Yeah,
idea.
fair enough. But
That was these old people who I'm 76. Now these old people look young to me, right?
exactly.
This is the theory of relativity in another dimension.
This is very true. But I want to come back to the question still.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
young, you know, where
Yeah.
did what did you imagine? 'Cause I'm always curious about the paths which we walk, choices we make, how
Yeah.
we choose to matter, where we thought we were going to go, where we didn't go. Because many are searching
Yeah.
today. Many young people are also wondering about
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Um, I guess I assumed I was going to be a scientist.
Huh, okay.
That had been kind of my growing up
Yeah.
path. I was intending to major in physics. Um, but as I said before, it was in a time of a lot of disarray, and maybe there's some parallels now to that.
Hmm.
The in the late 60s, the world seemed like it was being turned on its head.
Hmm.
Predicted pathways were being scrambled. It wasn't clear where things were going to go.
Hmm.
Uh, the country was at war. We had a military draft. So that was looming over all of our heads. I pulled a high number in the draft lottery, which meant I wouldn't be drafted. But until that happened, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, and I think in my college years, I was living very much day to day.
Interesting.
Here I am now. Let's do this day, rather than thinking about a longer term career
Yeah.
trajectory. And it took a while for that to distill because even after college, I did wonderful creative entrepreneurial things, but not with there wasn't a clear line of strategy running through it all.
But there's a red thread. I mean, to me, the red thread, or
There
I'll
is a
call the
thread.
green thread, not the red thread, but pick
Sure,
whatever
good,
color.
well played.
It through your life, when we look back at it, which was not maybe so clear at the moment, but That has been.
Well, there is. It, went from the World Game with Bucky to the Institute for Local Self-Reliance in DC, where we did, for example, the first rooftop farm in the United States, we think, a mile from the White House, to um, to graduate work in sustainable agriculture, ecological agriculture,
Mhm.
to trying to create a Center for Sustainable Agriculture in California, a noble attempt that failed, to a short-term gig with the California governor's office that turned into 4 years in the Office of Appropriate Technology, trying to bring these ideas into state government policy,
Yeah.
which was a real eye-opener for me, Chris, because until then, I was very cynical about government.
Yeah.
And there I was on the inside and started to learn, oh, this is how it works. Oh, you actually can do things here if you play this game the way that the game is
Yeah.
played. And we did some remarkable things. This is under Jerry Brown's first
Yeah.
term. Um, then, and then what looks like a diversion, half a dozen years leading a communications and marketing company focused really, in truth, on peace propaganda and what came to be called social marketing.
Yeah.
And then this transition into the work with corporates around sustainability as a business strategy, as a business value driver. Um, and then from there to a secondment, what was going to be a 1 or 2 year secondment as the first chief sustainability officer for the city of Palo Alto at the heart of Silicon Valley. And I laughed because it turned into 5 years. That's that secondment, because that's how long it took to build what was at that time probably the most aggressive climate action plan of any city in the United States. And then starting to build this private equity firm, and mostly focusing my time now on working one-on-one with leaders and emerging leaders as what's called an executive coach, of helping individual people be more effective and more impactful and more successful and more equanimous in the face of the world we're living in.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons for that well is that the challenge of both securing a large corporate client and doing the work to move a large corporate client in a new direction, it's tough and it's slow and it's got a lot of friction in it. And I'm finding enormous satisfaction in working one-on-one with world changers, helping world changers change worlds. Very direct, truth-telling, tough love. Um, and deep work that's richly impactful for my clients and frankly richly satisfying for me.
Fantastic. Thank you,
Yeah.
Sheila, for sharing that in that arc and the reminder of leadership and the importance of leadership. And that's not just leaders of large corporations, but leaders of ourselves, leaders of at every stage.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And leadership is also decision making and how we make those choices.
Yeah.
I think this is a
Yeah. Yeah. Leadership happens in conversation.
mhm,
Most things happen in conversation.
mhm,
The world happens in conversation, as my mentor Fernando Flores teaches. But leadership happens in conversations, both in the conversations we have with each other, but also, as you've just observed, in the conversations that we have with
mhm,
ourselves. What's the inner landscape? What's the self-talk? What are the interpretations that we're living in?
yeah.
What other interpretations become possible? I was with a client yesterday, who I noticed he used the word struggle a lot. It just sort of peppered his conversation about different things. And so at one point I stopped, said, let's talk about it a little bit. Like, what is that? Where's that living? Not just, he gestured physically to his body, but also where's that living in your thoughts? And he realized it's an interpretation. It's a name he gives to a set of phenomena he experiences. It might be a challenge, or it might be like it's hard work, or there's a lot of things I have to do before I can get this done. And invited him to just, try on different words other than struggle.
Mhm.
Well, remarkably, not surprisingly, Chris, but remarkably, his mood just lightened up. He'd been kind of constricted and in some pain, talking about struggle of all this stuff. And then it just kind of shifted, and it was like, oh, there's this creative challenge. There's stuff I need to do. I actually know how to do that. I know how to do that. I don't know how to do that, but I can learn how to do that. And excuse me, and his mood all of a sudden was different, lighter, more open, more creative, more possible.
Yeah. That's right.
Later in the conversation, he said, struggling. I thought, okay, just no big deal. Just notice over the next week. Just notice. how that word shows up in your conversation. So there's an inner leadership that also lives in language.
I think that's a really great point, Gilles, and also how you say noticing what we do, right? Is a
Mhm.
reminder of every day our actions, our choices, our movements, our words matter. And this is extremely
Mhm.
important as a
Yeah,
great reminder
yeah,
for us.
yeah,
So
yeah,
let me ask you
yeah.
something, just to change the theme for a moment. So the future, looking ahead.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's very often said the future does not repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme.
It's also said that prediction is very hard, especially about the future.
Terribly difficult, It's beautiful about the
Yeah,
past, but but
yeah, yeah.
what excites you about the future?
Well, I continue to be animated 50 plus years in by this vision of a world that works. As Bucky said, for 100% of humanity, I would say now that works for all life.
Hmm.
Because I know in my grounded, science in the bones kid that when I look at the data, I see that it can work. The challenge is how do we organize, the human potential and the human will around that. So I have an optimism about that. I have a passion for, dedicating my life to contributing to that. Um, um, I'm hesitating because of how to say this. Um, I know that that's possible, and I also know that I have to remind myself about that possibility because the onslaught of global media is in a different direction. The story is in a different direction, and frankly, a lot of the political reality right now is very tumultuous and very uncertain.
Yeah.
And we're living in a time that people will look back on 200 or 300 years from now and say this is a pivotal historical era in humanity. It will have a name, like the Renaissance and Enlightenment and et cetera have had names. I don't know what the name will be. So, um, uh, I'm not making predictions. I'm a futurist who's given up predicting the future because I think it's a fool's game at this point. But the possibility is there.
Yeah.
One of the first things I learned when I was CSO at Palo Alto from the outgoing assistant city manager would, in the middle of the most contentious meetings, would stop and look at people and say, "Folks, what might be possible here?" And it was a lovely disarming question. It was like a universal solvent into a messy meeting. It wasn't asking for people to stake a position and argue for it, but just to kind of open their imagination a little bit and touch into what they really care about and imagine what might be possible. So I live in that question.
Hmm.
Um, how that's shown up in my work with business is that whereas 30 years ago I was arguing for the business case. Here's why this makes sense for your company to do these things. Now I'm asking a different question. I'm asking what might be possible if we actually did business as though we belonged to the living world
Hmm.
and to each other, because actually we do. And so that's my version of the question. What might be possible if we did business that way? And it's an invitation to imagination, creativity, and innovation and entrepreneurship to create different ways of doing business and life in an advanced, economy on a crowded planet to make that work. So that's where I'm oriented now. And, in the coaching work, in the writing and speaking that I'm doing, in the Living Between Worlds podcast we do every month, in the keynote speaking that I'm doing, and just in conversations, one on one, one on three, two on 10. Um, because again, the world, this is Flores has drilled this lesson into me, but I'm feeling it really true that the world lives in conversation. We bring worlds into being in how we speak to each other, in the requests and offers that we make to each other, in the commitments that we make to each other,
Hmm.
in the interpretations that we tell ourselves. And that feels like a place of profound leverage and opportunity and sometimes gift for me.
It's fantastic. I love that. I really do. Yeah, I think I can see the energy as you speak that and your commitment to it. So where does Gil Friend go for inspiration? What what who inspires you?
A great question. Um, human passion and creativity inspire me. Human care, how people care for each other at all levels and all cultures inspires me. Um, Beautiful landscapes, both I'm thinking of both visual landscapes like the sunset over San Francisco Bay, but also the landscapes of a Beethoven symphony. I've been losing myself in music a lot lately.
Beautiful.
Just not just listening, but surrendering deeply into music. There's an inspiration there. The in indigenous knowledge
Mm-hmm.
and indigenous ways of living. I'm talking about tens of thousands of years of human experience in living on Earth. As Western minds begin to quiet and open to that, inspires me deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Learning as we've learned in recent decades that the landscapes of North America that the Europeans encountered, what we know,
Mm-hmm.
400 years ago, were some of them were wild landscapes, some of them were cultivated landscapes that had been tended by indigenous cultures for hundreds, if not thousands of years, with an ecological sophistication that we're just beginning to rediscover. I'm inspired there too.
Those are beautiful. I can echo all of those, Gil. I think those are. I can say thank you for those, Gil. I find great resonance with all of those, with each and every one of those. I do, and I find also the creativity of the human spirit is also one I find quite inspiring for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is another one. So Gil, is there something I should have asked you which I haven't asked you yet about you
That
and the
question, Chris.
choices that you have made in your life?
Mm. I should have been ready for this question, but I'm not, and I don't have one for you right
Oh,
now.
that's
I think you've done it. It's a wonderful series of questions.
yeah.
I'd I'd love to turn this around and do an interview with you, asking you many of the same questions
You're, you're
to
very
hear your
you're
story.
very welcome to, but not right now.
Yeah,
So
not right now. No, of course not.
so Jill, I have
Yeah.
a question I'd like to ask, which is you have had a fantastic career within the sustainability world. And I return to the first three words which you used to describe yourself of scout,
Mm.
of translator. And what was the third one again? This is a
A pollinator.
pollinator. Yeah, yeah.
A pollinator. Yeah.
So if you would look back at those and think of your career, was there
Mm.
one turning point at which made those come together, or they evolve with over time? Or are they something that when the consciousness of your critical role actually emerge for you?
Well, there's two questions in there in what you're asking. The turning point, I guess, a turning point, a significant turning point for me had to be the time with Buckminster Fuller and his crew at World Game. Sort of in two dimensions. One was the deep immersion into whole systems, thinking and research and work. It was my first encounter with that frame of being, not the fragmented, isolated, linear way of thinking, but seeing the web of interconnections, both intellectually and functionally. It was profound. I learned more in 4 weeks there than in 4 years of college.
Fantastic.
Um, and and the rest of it is not so much a turning point, but an evolution over the stories that I've told you. Sort of a deepening of experience and enriching of perspective and adding of layers to the story.
Hmm.
You know, I often find myself thinking about the metaphor of the moire pattern. Where I can hold up a screen that looks like a rectilinear grid of wire and hold up another screen over it and turn it, and there's all of a sudden different pictures available. And so part of what we do is bringing in different overlays at different times
Hmm.
to disclose different patterns that
Yeah.
can't be seen without the combination.
Hmm.
And so my life story, I guess, is a little bit like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Different overlays, different experiences, seeing different patterns and possibilities as I've gone. And at my best, I guess I'm bringing to people that I'm to bring to people that I'm speaking with all of that experience,
Hmm.
all that I've gathered over the last 50 plus years to say, well, have you thought about it this
Yeah.
way? What if you looked at it this way? Did you know about this example that might be relevant for you? Because, all of us in busy lives, we're focused on what we're focused on. And sometimes it's the piece that comes from outside the box that has the key to what's missing at that moment.
It's important. It's very important that.
Yeah.
Gilles, I've What challenge or question would you like to leave our listeners with?
Mm. Well, since you asked for a challenge or a question, let me give you both. Okay. The challenge, and this has been clear to me since the work with Bucky Fuller 50 plus years ago, is how do we get the prices right?
Hmm. Hmm.
How do we get it so that in a so-called free market, the prices that we pay for things reflects their real cost? Right now, we live in a highly subsidized, highly externalized economy where when I buy, I buy a conventionally produced apple or a regeneratively produced apple, the price of the regenerative apple is going to be higher in today's market because the so-called conventional doesn't include the costs of soil depletion, the health impacts of pesticides, the dropping of water tables, and so forth. It's not priced in. No, so it's not. So the rational person at the supermarket doesn't have that information built into the price signal, so they choose this rather than that. Um, uh, you know, I can say as a person who thinks about those things, I'm going to pay more to buy this one. But for most people, it has to be simple. It's just like, here's a decision, boom. How do we embed that rather than right now, for example, what are we subsidizing fossil fuels to the tune of $7 trillion a year, skewing the
It's
market.
crazy. Yeah, it's crazy.
So for a free market to work, the information has to be true. We're not there. Let's get the prices right. That's the challenge. And it's a big challenge. We can talk about that another time. Um, the question, I'll repeat the question I asked before, what might it be like if we did business and everything else as though we actually belong to the living world and to each other?
Yeah.
Because we do.
A great question, Gilles, and it's a perfect moment for me to say thank you. Thank you very, very much for sharing your journey, also for the work you have been doing and you continue to do
Thank
to
you.
matter. And
It's been a real pleasure and
I
wonderful questions,
really,
Chris. Thank you for
I
that.
really do truly appreciate it. And you have made many choices as you have crafted a life that matters
Mm.
for yourself and for all of us. So thank you for that. I'd like to make a toast with our wonderful murky cocktail here. A toast to our collective
There we
future,
go.
Gilles. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to it. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening today. It's really been a pleasure to share this story with you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon and meeting our next guest. And as always, do something today that makes a difference in somebody's life. Choose to matter.